We're going to be looking at Chapter 5 and an overview of art. So many people think studying the history of art means that you're going to be required to memorize old paintings from the 12th and the 15th century. Well, that's not what it really is. Art is much more than just paintings. When we look at art, you are studying all types of art, from film to media to landscaping to ceramics to armor to furniture to fashion, jewelry, photography, performances, and so much more. Sometimes the only way we have of knowing a culture is by the pictures that they leave behind, because sometimes there is no written word. This presentation will be a broad overview of some of the very early ideas around art and about why we make art, who we are as humans that pushes us to want to make marks. You're going to also find that there's other lectures in this section under the faculty lecture area on different periods, different styles, going all the way to modernism. So, what is art? Well, that's an excellent question. What makes something art? What makes something an artifact? Furthermore, what separates the art from the artisan, from the artist? The answers lie all in the study of art history. Some say art is made of creativity, originality, and imagination. Art historians say that art should be something that's visually striking and blends beauty and culture. So, something you remember. Studying art is to look at a piece of art and see the artist's use of line, shape, composition, texture, and approach, and to make inferences about what you think their intention was and what is their meaning. Art history is looking at those same aspects throughout different periods of history to learn more about certain times and periods and people. And as we move through different periods of history, there's another thing that is happening, and that is technological change. So some of the tools that we have to make marks and to leave images behind were not the same tools that we had, say, for example, in the Stone Age. We didn't have video recorders back then, did we? So we only have a limited amount of what they left behind in their images. So this is the Mona Lisa, probably one of the most famous paintings on earth. She was painted by Leonardo da Vinci. Her real name was Mona Lisa Lia Gioconda. She was the wife of Francesco del Giocondo. It is just a half-length portrait of an Italian woman, and it's acclaimed, like I said, to be probably the most famous painting of a woman in history, and probably the most sung about and written about and parodied in the entire world. This painting is in oil on a piece of poplar wood, a poplar panel that was sanded very carefully, and is believed to have been painted between 1503 and 1506. It was acquired by the King of France, Francis I, and is now the property of the French Republic, and it's on permanent display in the Musée du Louvre in Paris. So there's some ambiguity here when we look at the painting. What is her expression? Is she smiling or not? Some people describe her as having her eyes move around the room. Wherever you look at her, she's still looking at you, even though they sort of feel like they're kind of going off, to her left. The forms in the background, what is all that about? That was all made up. A lot of people think that he carried this painting around with him for 3 to 4 years and continued to paint on it even though she wasn't there. Is there anything interesting that you notice about the painting? Anything unusual about the woman? We'll just look at it for a second. One thing I noticed right away, maybe you don't, but is that she doesn't have any eyebrows. And also she's got a really high forehead. So at that time it was a fashion to shave off your eyebrows and to shave off the top part of your hairline so that it made your hairline, go back further, so it would give you the illusion of having this very high forehead because it made you look more intelligent. So who knew? All right, let's move into the history of art at the beginning. So we're going to look, we're going to go back and look at some caves around the world. We're going to look at the Chauvet cave, and we're going to look at the Lascaux cave. And we can see that these cave paintings are everywhere. So it's impossible to state exactly when modern humans, Homo sapiens, began to create works of art. But famous examples date all the way back to 40,000 before Common Era. However, the oldest known cave art is actually created by Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis, a species closely related to us, around 63,000 before Common Era. So this is the Chauvet Pont d'Arc cave. It's in the Ardèche department of southeastern France and is a cave that contains some of the best preserved figurative cave paintings in the world, as well as other evidence of Upper Paleolithic life. It is located near the commune of Vallon Pont d'Arc on the limestone cliffs above the former bed of the river Ardèche and the gorges of Ardèche. It was discovered on December 8th in 1994. It is considered one of the most significant prehistoric art sites, and the UN Cultural Agency UNESCO granted it World Heritage status on June 22, 2014. The cave was first explored by a group of 3 speleologists. At a later date, the group returned to the cave and traveled further into the cave, into the deep part of it, and discovered the Gallery of the Lions and the end chamber. In addition to the paintings and other human evidence, they also discovered fossilized remains and prints and markings from a variety of animals, some of which are now all extinct. The cave is extensive, about 1/4 of a mile long, and it has many vast chambers. The floor of the cave is littered with remains, including the skulls and bones of bears, which hibernated there, along with the skulls of an ibex and 2 wolves. The Chauvet cave was used as a hibernation place by cave bears for millennia, before Paleolithic people began to inhabit it. The cave bears also left scratches deep into the walls and footprints on the ground. Above all the deepest parts of the cave, entire sections of the walls have been lacerated by claw marks. Some of them are almost 10 feet in the air, which corresponds to the height of a large bear standing on its hind legs. The cave must be preserved and studied, but its importance to human history is so great that plans for a replica were soon made after its discovery. After several years and 55 million euros, the replica opened in 2015. It is the largest, most detailed replica cave ever made in the world. Every attempt was made to recreate the actual cave, including the calcite-covered animal bones scattered on the floor. There is an exhibition building that you can visit before the tour that teaches you all about the prehistoric humans and the animal remains. The official name of the replica cave is now Grotte Chauvet II. Since the real cave is almost inaccessible, photographs were used here to reproduce it. After several digital campaigns of the Chauvet cave, a digital clone was made, and based on all the technical and scientific replication work was carried out from 2008 to 2013. So there you can see where the Grotte Chauvet is and kind of where the entryway is for the actual Chauvet cave. And here's a digital representation, a mapping of the actual space before it was built. Guided tours are the only way that you can go there. Reservations are strongly recommended, and you can book online if you do end up going to France. But it's a very, very, very popular attraction. And if you remember, the very first image that I showed you in this video was of that of people on that boardwalk. So the Chauvet Cave, one of the biggest areas is the Hall of the Lions. And these are prides of lions that hunt bison, one of the rarest scenes ever found in Paleolithic art. But I want you to look at the faces of these lions. Look at how artistically they're made, how realistic they are. And so many times we look at these, we think about these Paleolithic people, and they didn't have all the technological advancements that we have, and we think of them as maybe being less intelligent somehow. But when you start to realize that they had to figure out, first of all, how to make, to get the charcoal to be able to make these, and the ochre and the other elements that they used to make these drawings, and that they had to go deep into the cave, and they had to bring light in order to be able to make these drawings. When you think of all of those things, they did a lot with the little bit of technology that they had. In addition, we think about what we have today, all the technological advancements. They were made one at a time. And as one thing grew, then another person looked at that information, and they modified it, and they made it better or worse. But they, modified it and continued forward. So we stand on the shoulders of centuries of humans who made technological advancements in order for us to have and live the way we do today. These cave people, these Paleolithic peoples, were extremely intelligent. All right, let's look at another cave. So this is Lascaux. Again, when the Chauvet was discovered, many scholars initially assume that it must have been made at the same time as Lascaux, about 21,000 years ago. But after radiocarbon dating showed us that the Chauvet cave had been occupied maybe twice as long. The Aurignacian people, among the first Homo sapiens to live in Europe, brought to the cave fully formed artistic traditions that used a variety of techniques, including charcoal and different types of red pigment. Now, a new batch of 88 radiocarbon dates has further defined the cave's chronology. Humans used the cave for 37,000 to 33,500 years ago, and again 31,000 to 28,000 years ago, the research has found. And a series of chlorine isotope dates shows that the cave's entrance was sealed by a rock around the time of its last use. So let's take a look at the Grotte de Lascaux, or the Lascaux Cave. So the Lascaux Cave is a network of caves near the village of Montignac in the department of Dordogne in southwestern France. Over 600 parietal wall paintings cover the interior walls and ceilings of the cave. The paintings represent primarily large animals, typical local contemporary fauna that correspond with the fossil records of Upper Paleolithic periods. They are combined efforts of many generations. With continued debate, the age of the paintings is now estimated at around, in the Lascaux Cave, 17,000 years early Magdalenian. Because of the outstanding prehistoric art in the cave, Lascaux was also inducted into the World Heritage List in 1979, and as an element of prehistoric site and decorated caves. In 1940, an 18-year-old Marcel Ravida was out for a walk with his dog Robot in a French countryside when Robot fell into a big hole and disappeared. Upon closer inspection, Ravida realized it was not a hole, but it was an entrance to an actual cave. And he gathered up his friends, and later, with some lanterns, the teenagers went spelunking. What they discovered that day was astonishing. With mineral pigments and charcoal, all now known as the Lascaux paintings, the floor formed a succession of terraced basins full of water. The uncertain light of their lamp barely pierced the darkness. And it wasn't until they reached the first narrowing of the passage at the entrance to a keyhole-shaped gallery that the four teenagers made out the first paintings on the wall. They were Marcel Ravida, Jacques Marsal, Georges Agnel, and Simon Conecas. So here we can see kind of an overview of the cave and the entrance. So there's, you can see our entrance, and then I've got a little list here of the different names of and the different figures that are in the caves. So all told, there are about 6,000 figures in the cave, about a fifth of them animals, and the largest of them are the aurochs, which are 5 meters long. No wonder the boys who discovered the cave said, "We knew the cave inside and out, yet at every visit we were always starstruck with awe." Almost immediately, people wanted to visit, and guided tours proved very lucrative for the locals. On July 14th, 1948, Lascaux was actually open to the public, with archaeological investigations beginning at around the same time. By the mid-1950s, they were seeing about 1,200 visitors a day. Picasso shook his head in wonder. "We have invented nothing new," the artistic innovator said. But the carbon dioxide from his breath and that of all the other visitors that increased the humidity and temperature changed the cave and started to damage the paintings. And in some cases, they were damaged beyond restoration, leaving only the drawings of the first visitors as a record of what had been there. So here we're going to look at some of the images from this cave, and so you can kind of see what they look like. So this is called the Hall of the Bulls, and you can see how they're painted way above the height. And so either they had to crawl up on the sides of those walls to try to get and paint all of that, or they had to build some type of scaffolding. And there is remnants of lighting, like from animal fat in shells that they probably used to make crude lamps, and also what might have been remains of wood that they created scaffolding with to be able to get to the height. And some of these different halls, like this is the Hall of the Bulls. Some of them are up to 40 feet in height. So just to tell you that, these are not haphazard. These were not just like, oh, by the way, I'm going to do this. No, these were very, very predetermined. Here's another image of the Hall of the Bulls, a little distorted, but it's kind of like a long hallway. And there you can see all the different bull shapes. I love this image of it's a deer or an elk of some sort, maybe a reindeer. I mean, they're so delicate and beautiful. This is a running deer. The decision then was made in 1963 to close the caves to everyone but the professionals, with restrictions on visits becoming ever more stringent since then. More than 1 million people had already seen the caves in the 20 years that it was open since its rediscovery. In 1979, Lascaux's significance was confirmed, and the Vizier had done some 24 painted walls as well as 3 types of different rock shelters, but the art at Lascaux is the most vivid and detailed, as well as being the largest in scale. So how could the public see this historic site without simultaneously destroying it? Well, they couldn't. So we had to, close it. So I'm going to move on, and we're going to look at a little bit of sculpture. So this is called the Woman of Willendorf, and it was carved out of limestone and was covered with a thick layer of red ochre when it was discovered in 1908. The figure was found on the left bank of the Danube in Willendorf in Austria on August 7th, 1908, during excavations led by Joseph Zambathi, supervised by Hugo Obermeier and Joseph Bayer. The figure, originally named the Venus of Willendorf, had a name change. The Venus had a name change. One effect of the name change, Venus to woman, is to remove her from immediate identification as a goddess and to think of her more in a mundane and human form. The demystification allows us to approach the figure more on their own terms and without encumbering preconceptions provoked by a name. That gives us a better chance of interpreting its meaning. So, to call her like a Venus or a goddess of Willendorf is to say that they worshipped her. We don't know that. We don't know anything. We just know she could have been some sort of fertility doll. I mean, it would almost be like if there were no written words about our culture today. And then, let's say, a millennia from now, some other creatures come to the earth and they find all these plastic Barbie dolls and they don't know what they are. So they start calling them, Venus of America, right? It's like, no, we never worshipped Barbie, or maybe we do, I guess, with the new movie. But I mean, really, it's like we don't. And so the idea of calling it a Venus, which was, some male archaeologist came up with that, is, better to say woman. So they are, in essence, small Paleolithic figures of women, sometimes, but not very often, there's some men, but almost never. They're almost always women. The age of these figurines cover a time span from 27,000 years ago to about 20,000 years ago. Times were very different in the late 19th and early 20th century when these were first discovered. Like many professions, the field of anthropology was dominated almost entirely by white males, and many interpretations about ancient cultures came on from their understanding. And what we could say, honestly, is their cultural bias. The French name of the first figurine was discovered. The French name of the first figurine ever discovered, the Venus, translates to immodest Venus. In other words, the figure was named to intentionally contrast a style of Roman statues known as Venus pudique, which literally means or translates as nude goddess of love, covering her genitals with her hands. So here we can see the Venus de Milo next to the, Venus of, or woman of Willendorf. The woman of Willendorf, estimated at around 25 to 30,000 years old, has long been a source of contemporary mystery and intrigue for a good reason. Little was known about its origin and purpose. The statuette, as suggested by its nature, was quickly saddled with the burdens of human history. She was sexualized with a blithe reference to antiquity, although the context of its creation was in Paleolithic times and to this day remains obscure. Now, thanks to research led by anthropologist Gerhard Weber at the University of Vienna, we now know that the stone that was used to create the figurine originated from Italy, over 350 miles away from Willendorf in Austria, and across a formidable mountain range, the Alps. Analysis of these female figures has yielded many interesting theories concerning their purpose within the lives of Paleolithic peoples. The statues themselves were crafted during the prehistoric time known as the Aurignacian period. The life of the Paleolithic person oftentimes centered around the hunt. However, archaeological evidence has also shown the importance of gathering. What is clear is that these female figures are found throughout Europe in a variety of places with differing physiques, and the symbolism attached to them, they are thought by the majority of scholars to be some sort of a fertility object, or symbols of, some sort of earth cult or fertility cult. Okay. This is a miniature head. Think about this being, how small this is. It's like less than 2 inches. It's 1.5 inches. So it's very tiny. And think about how much time it took to create. The head was carved from ivory and certainly is a beginning expression of beauty. So if we looked at the Venus, we don't really see a face, right? There's no face here. There's the curled hair, this sort of in rows. But when we look at the woman of Brasempouy, we don't see that. We see her actual face. The head was carved from ivory and certainly expresses beauty. Found at Brasempouy-Landes, France, it may be 30,000 years old. It is one of the very few Ice Age figures with facial features and a detailed hairstyle. The woman of Brasempouy was carved from mammoth ivory, and according to archaeologist Paul Bahn, the head is called a Venus or a lady, while the forehead, nose, and brows are carved in relief. The mouth is absent. A vertical crack on the right side of the face is a consequence of internal structure of the ivory. On the head is a checkerboard-like pattern formed by 2 series of shallow incisions at right angles at each other. It has been interpreted as a wig, a hood with geometric decoration, or simply a representation of the hair styled in maybe cornrows or some type of braid. a drawing by Libor Balak depicting a reconstruction of the Lady of Brassempouy from the western Brassempouy area. Although this may be inaccurate due to Europeans having darker skin 23 to 29,000 years ago, what we have to note here is now we are not looking at a faceless symbol of possible fertility, but an artist's attempt to give us the beauty that they saw in that face. Remember, this is carved on a 1.5-inch piece of bone. Think about the effort this would take, the patience, and maybe the love. A lot of times when we talk about art, we talk about the idea of imitation. So that would be where people are like kind of looking at one thing and using it as a reference and then rebuilding it, or, copying, if you will. But when we talk about imitation within art, we want to think about it as a broad definition. Imitation does not refer exclusively to what looks real or imitating more than reality. In the humanities, the artist uses reality as a starting point and not an ending point. So in other words, it's a place to begin, a jumping off point, if you will, to like make something more. So we think about art, yes, we've looked at, nature, we looked at another human being, we've looked at the things that are real, but we also added to them. So now we're going to take a little look at what children, making children's art. So when we think about children's art, we think about a behavior. Like other kinds of behavior, it undergoes changes with time, so that it's possible to look at artistic behavior as it develops through the life of an individual. And so when we think about little children making art, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, do we ask them to do it? Or do they do it on their own? When a child gets a marker in their hand, you can't stop them from making marks. They're going to make marks on their arms, on their legs, on their floor, on their brothers and their sisters, on the wall, whatever they can make a mark on. And they get great pleasure in it. So I say to you, do you think mark making is a God-given human trait? That this is part of who we are as humans, just like we have a voice, we have eyes to see, we have ears to hear? Do you think mark making is part of who we are and is a God-given natural talent? So let's think about artistic behavior. So artistic behavior in children usually begins around the age of 1 year with the sensory activity of banging a tool on the surface. Banging is repeated over and over for the sensory pleasure it gives. So just think of them smacking that tool. And eventually marks are created, and we call those, when children make them, we call those bang dots. As the children gets more muscle control, the marks are not just accidentals. Pretty soon they become, what we call conscious control of the child, who learns how to drag the implement that they're making marks with as a result, and they start creating linear and circular movement, right? So we call those longitudinal circular scribbles, and repetition and variation. So you can see how this child tried to redraw over and over again the same sort of marks. As children come to attribute meaning to their marks, they will name their scribbles. This naming first occurs after making the marks, and then while making the marks, and eventually at the end, they will declare in advance what they are going to make. So we call that romanticizing. So we don't always know. Children just start making, and mom says, oh, what is that? And then, they say, oh, that's mom, or that's whatever. They want to please them, so they come up with an idea of what the name is, but that's not always the way it goes. So going back to scribbling, the making of straight and circular lines soon leads to the closing of forms to make a variety of shapes, both regular and irregular. These lines and shapes may be arranged in pairs, combines, or groups of 3 or more aggregates. At the age of 2 or 3, the child will usually produce a drawing which contains linear and circular elements, known as the mandala, Sanskrit for the magic circle. The mandala is the immediate precursor of the baby's first drawing of a person. So, and we see these all over the world. This sort of shape with this line going through the middle of it. Sometimes the line even looks like a cross. And if we say to the child, oh, what is that? Then they'll say it's so-and-so. But it's not like think of it as not being a representation, an imitation of the person, but more of the sense of the person. You know, it's like if you close your eyes and you think of your best friend, you might not see their identical face. You might not see, but you can kind of get a feeling of that person, just like in a dream. With the production of the first image recognizable to adults, the child enters what we call the pre-schematic stage of development. In this stage, a child produces schema, conceptual representations of people, and things in the child's sensory experience of the world. See, I made a person. Notice that there's that circle again. We've kind of pushed a little bit further. We have eyes and nose and mouth, but notice we don't have a body yet. And here's the same. We don't really have a body. So they have the circle, a few dots, straight strokes. This simple drawing is a graphic equivalent of a person, or what's sometimes called tadpole people. Over time, a number of variations are added. So let's switch gears for a moment. And let's go into art history. And let's go back to the Greeks, ancient Greece, and the Hellenes as they were called. So if we look at ancient Greece, we see where it's located here around the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. So we have the Sea of Crete. Greece is the main island, and then all of these little islands all throughout. So what I want to talk about next is kind of like a creationist story of Greece. So in the beginning, there was only chaos. Then out of the void came Erebus, the unknown, unknowable place where death dwells, and night with night, and all else was empty, silent, endless darkness. Then somehow love was born, bringing a start to order. From love came light and day. And then there was light and day, and Gaia, the earth, appeared. And then Erebus slept with night, who gave birth to ether, the heavenly light, and to the day, the earthly light. And then night alone produced doom, fate, death, sleep, dreams, nemesis, and others came to man out of darkness. Meanwhile, Gaia gave birth to Uranus and heavens, and Uranus became Gaia's mate, covering her on all sides. Together they produce the 3 Cyclops and the 3 Hecatocheires and the 12 Titans. However, Uranus was a bad father and husband, and he hated the Hecatocheires, and he imprisoned them by pushing them into the hidden places of the earth and into Gaia's womb. The angered Gaia and plotted against Uranus. She made a flint sickle, and she tried to get her children to attack Uranus, but they were afraid. The youngest Titan, Cronus. Gaia and Cronus set up an ambush of Uranus as he lay with Gaia at night. Cronus grabbed his father and hit him with a stone sickle, throwing his body parts into the ocean. The fate of Uranus is not clear. He either died or withdrew from the earth or exiled himself to Italy. As he departed, he promised that Cronus and the Titans would be punished. From his spilt blood came the giants, the ash tree nymphs, and the Erinyes from the sea foam where his body parts had been thrown, and they fell and came to Aphrodite. Cronus became the next ruler. He imprisoned the Cyclops and the Hecatocheires in Tartarus. He married his sister Rhea. Upon his rule, the Titans had many offspring. He ruled for many years. However, Gaia and Uranus both had prophesied that he would be overthrown by a son. To avoid this, Cronus swallowed each of his children as they were born. Rhea was angry at the treatment of the children and plotted against Cronus. When it came time to give birth to her 6th child, Rhea hid herself. Then she left the child to be raised by nymphs. To conceal her act, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and passed it off as the baby to Cronus, who swallowed it. The child was Zeus. He grew into a handsome youth on Crete. He consulted Metis on how to defeat Cronus. She prepared a drink for Cronus designed to make him vomit up all the other children. Rhea convinced Cronus to accept her son, and Zeus was allowed to return to Mount Olympus as Cronus's cupbearer. This gave Zeus the opportunity to slip Cronus the specially prepared drink. This worked as planned, and the other 5 children were vomited, being gods that were unharmed. They were thankful to Zeus and made him their leader. Cronus was yet to be defeated. He and the Titans, except for Prometheus, Epitheus, and Oceanus, fought to retain their power. Atlas became their leader, and in the battle, it looked for some time as though they would win and put the young gods down. However, Zeus was cunning. He went down to Tartarus and freed the Cyclops and the Hecateres, and Prometheus joined Zeus as well. He returned to battle with his new allies. The Cyclops provided Zeus with lightning bolts for weapons. They set up an ambush armed with boulders, and when the time was right, Zeus retreated, drawing the Titans into the ambush. And then they rained down hundreds of boulders in such a fury that the Titans thought the mountains were falling onto them, and they broke ranks and they gave Zeus the victory. Zeus exiled the Titans who had fought against him, all except for Atlas, who was singled out for special punishment. He now had to hold the world on his shoulders. However, even after the victory, Zeus was not safe. Gaia, angry that her children had been imprisoned, gave birth to her last offspring, Typhoeus. Typhoeus was so fearsome that most of the gods fled. However, Zeus faced the monster, flinging lightning bolts to kill him. He was buried at Mount Etna in Sicily. Much later, a final challenge to Zeus was made by the giants. They went so far as an attempt to invade Mount Olympus, piling mountain upon mountain in an effort to reach the top. But the gods were stronger, and with the help of Hercules, the giants were subdued and killed. And so there we can see, some of these stories and myths and these creationist myths that come out of ancient Greece. So we look at the Greek people. One of the interesting sculptures that they create over and over is this. This is called the kouros, or if plural, if there's multiples, it's called the kourai. And basically what it means is a male youth, and at least from the 5th century, specifically an unbearded male. Modern art historians use the term to refer to ancient Greek male nudes standing with their fists at their side and their left foot forward. Notice how stiff they are. Ancient Greeks probably would not have separated these figures from other types of archaic sculptures of young men. So here's another. This is the Metropolitan Kouros in the Metropolitan Museum. They many times refer to these figures as Apollos, but notice how stiff they are. And as we shall see, it's definitely not the case. Here's, just to kind of show you where they are. They're about 6 feet tall. Here's another little bit later. So this is 600 to 590 before Common Era. And now we can look at the Cleobis and Biton Kouros, and this is 590. Notice how they're becoming a little bit more human-like. So the Greeks are kind of taking on this sort of humanity. This is the Croesus Kouros, even more natural. Here we can see him again from the back. See how tall he is. How he's starting to look more and more human. So the Greeks were constantly trying to figure out, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean? What's the duality of humanity? Like the good and the bad, the evil and, the good. And so, and they recognized all those things, and they thought that in order to be a good person in culture and society, you had to be strength of mind, body, and spirit. Those are the things that they cared about. So how we go into a museum and a lot of times you'll see like a part of a statue, you'll see like a Greek, like a hand or a head. That would have been sacrilegious to the Greeks. Like it had to be the whole thing, right? So now we're all the way up to 530 before Common Era at the Getty Kouros. And so this man, this spirit, this culture, this Kouros is really like the spirit of man. It's a spirit of a man. It's not an identical figure of the man. So as we get into classical Greece, so this would be considered archaic, Hellenes, archaic Greek sculpture, very stiff. And then we get into this. So this is where we get into classical. This is when full-on naturalism takes place. This is 480 before Common Era. This is the Critias boy. Look at his stance. He's in what we call a contrapposto. Notice his hips are not straight. There's one that's dipped down further. It's like that weight on the back leg, and the other leg is slightly bent. At one time, I think they had made some, finished out the arms and everything, but we really don't know where the hands would go. So now archaeologists don't do that anymore. But here we can see the face of the Critias boy. again, there's this, the eyes most of the time had like lapis lazuli, some sort of stone in them. But the Greeks were amazing. I mean, they could make anything be balanced, and the Romans loved the Greeks, and they wanted to like recreate all these natural sculptures that the Greeks had made. And so here we see, this is the mother of Dionysus, and this is Hermes of Praxiteles. And notice that this is not a Greek sculpture. This is most likely a Roman copy. Notice how that there's this like stump with a fabric, kind of line, and that's how it's standing up. But look at how much more natural it is. So the whole idea of this Hermes is that the mother Thamele of Dionysus died from terror, and when Zeus appeared in front of her and all of his thunderbolts and all of his splendor, she was so afraid. And though she was pregnant at the time, and so Zeus took the infant and sent him to the nymphs at Crete with Hermes, and the baby started to cry, and in order to keep him quiet, Hermes was showing him a shiny object. So that's what this sculpture is about. So in the beginning, when they would make these sculptures, a lot of them were molded from marble, but they also made these bronzes. And so the Greek bronzes were like incredible, just incredible. So this is Poseidon, and this was found in the Aegean Sea in around 1926. You can see how big it is. So how do you make this? I mean, just again, to talk about the intelligence of these people and what they were able to accomplish without the tools that we have today. So beginning with a clay or plaster full-size model with all the details of the final work, a mold would be created. The mold was made of a weaker material than either marble or bronze, and was often made by covering a wooden frame with head, arms, legs, and body, and with a few layers of clay. The mold is created by covering the clay original with, so the original model would be clay, and then the clay original would be covered with wax. So it was usually about a half inch to an inch thick, and then a much thinner layer of clay over the top of the wax. Before the mold, consisting of the outer cover of clay, had dried, several large nails were inserted through the clay and the wax so it would tightly fit into the inner clay model. The reason for the nails is to act as a brace so that keep the model all in one place and not have anything break. So it does not move once the wax is starting to melt away and exit through the small holes that they drill at the bottom in different parts of the clay. At this point, with the wax gone, so they would heat the wax, and so you would just have this inner clay body with the outer clay mold and this about half inch to an inch thick area in between the two. The supporting function of the nails then would exist a half inch thick airspace between the mold and the model. This is a space that would then be filled with molten bronze, poured into a small hole or two in the mold. When the bronze had solidified and cooled, the clay would be removed, and revealing the hollow bronze statue. Well, it's not really hollow since all the clay had yet to be removed, but this is easily performed by scraping out the model from a small opening at the bottom, usually like in the feet there. The entire process provided the easiest method to provide a hollow bronze sculpture. But whether or not, this is an extremely difficult process. And the thing that I want to emphasize here is look at the arms reaching out, and Poseidon is going to throw his trident. And look at the way his foot is not firmly planted. That back foot is not firmly planted on the ground, but yet it balances perfectly. That is incredible. That was incredible to do. Very difficult. So here's a full image. All right. Let's take a look at the philosophers during this time. They were called the thinkers. They included the Sophists from 500 BC, the Socrates from 469 before Common Era, or before Christ, Plato 429, and Aristotle 384 before Christ. Although each philosopher had his own belief about what kept the universe and the people all moving, all the theories revolved around one notion, and that was the notion of reason. Aristotle combined the thoughts of many of the earlier philosophers in creating what he called the golden mean. This was the point at which ideas and matter were interwoven and balanced out to create truth. His philosophy weighed heavily on the human mind and its control over the bodies in action. And so going back to the ancient Greeks, we see two things. We see the Hellenes, or the Hellenic period, and then we see the Hellenistic period. And there's a big difference between the two. So the Hellenic period of Greece was a period of great militarism. The most honorable duty of an ancient Greek man was to serve his city. Greece was divided into city-states and ruled by the people. So now you start to understand when later on, when we get into the chapter on morality and ethics, how many of the Greeks believed that ethics were absolute, like you died for your country or not. This was one of the first instances of democracy in the ancient world. Of course, the people only included men because women of ancient Greece were not given the right to vote. The shift from Hellenic to Hellenistic in history of the Greek world represents a shift in culture dominated by ethnic Greeks, however, scattered geographically, to a culture dominated by Greek speakers of whatever ethnicity and from the political dominance of the city-state. In this period, the traditional Greek culture is changed by strong Eastern, especially Persian, influences. Modern historians see the death of Alexander the Great in 323 before Christ as dividing the Hellenic period from the Hellenes to the Hellenistic. Alexander and the Macedonians conquered the eastern Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, and invaded India. His successors held on to their territory for some time and controlled the eastern Mediterranean until the Roman Republic took control in the 2nd century before Christ. Characteristics of good and honorable men of this time were all tied to the ideas of humanism, of what does it mean to be human? What does it mean between good and evil? Humanism, which was the philosophy that Greeks lived by, dealt with all people putting their duty to the state before any emotional feelings that they had. Emotions were thought of as irrational and hindering. So that's why when we look at those chori, those sculptures of the men, there is no expression on their faces. They're very placid. We don't know what they're thinking, because if we knew what they're thinking, then we give up like what we're thinking. So that's weak. Men were constantly trained in the art of war and attended military schools away from their families for very young ages, from the age of 7 years old. With the decline of the Greek Empire, more emotions are portrayed in the artwork, including poetry, theater, oratory, and sculpture. That is new. So that never was the way that things were portrayed until much later. Humanism also reflected in the artwork of the time. Sculptures were very symmetrical and ordered in the archaic and classical sculptures, but then when we get to the Hellenistic period, they start to become asymmetrical and chaotic, and men were displayed in art of daily life. They were nude, but then later on they looked like military tools. They were more, they showed more emotion. They were not to be gawked at. They had perfect physiques for a reason, because they were strong. Because of the great focus on the society of war and militarism, think Spartans, it was preferable for women to give birth to male babies, and female infanticide was practiced quite commonly in ancient Greece. Women were seen as the head of the household, and they had household duties, but they were not portrayed in art as strong or ideal. Even in the theater, most of the time, all the roles were played by men. Much like life, the theater did not focus on costumes or settings. The actors were expected to use their bodies to convey who they were and what they were portraying. Marriage for women were contracted between the father of the bride and the groom, or the father of the groom, and were seen as a way to consolidate power and property, and as a way of a man to provide himself with sons. That was it. That's the reason why they got married. Men did not marry until they were in their 30s. Women, however, were expected to stay chaste and did not show themselves in public or when guests were being entertained. They had their own sides of the house. They never walked outside of it. Men were married early, many times in their, early to mid-teens. So here is an image of a Hellenic sculpture. so you can see like how the wind is blowing the wings. This is the Nike of Samothrace. Let's look at another. This is the Venus de Milo. She's depicting Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of sexual love and physical beauty. It is marble sculpture, 203 centimeters high. The sculpture dates to about 130 before Christ and is thought to be the work of Alexandros of Antioch. In 1820, the sculpture was found in the Aegean in the island of Melos by a peasant named Yorgos. He hid it from the authorities, but was later discovered by Turkish officials who seized it. A French naval officer, Jules Dumont d'Urville, recognized its significance and arranged for its purchase by the French ambassador to Turkey. So you can see that kind of like movement compared to what we had. Now let's really look at that full on. So this is Laocoon. So Laocoon, the son of Asodes, was a priest of Poseidon or Apollo by some counts at Troy. In the Homer and the Iliad and Virgil's Aeneid's detail of Laocoon's death, Laocoon is warned. He has warned his fellow Trojans against the wooden horse that was presented to the city by the Greeks. In the Aeneid, Virgil gives Laocoon the famous "Equo ne credite tecure, quid et est, times denos et dona ferentes." In other words, do not trust the horse, Trojans. Whatever it is, I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts. So do not trust the horse. This line is usually translated as beware of Greeks bearing gifts. In his anger that the Trojans had ignored his advice, Laocoon threw his spear at the horse. And Poseidon, some say that it was not Poseidon, but that it was Athena, who was supporting the Greeks, subsequently sent sea serpents to strangle Laocoon and his two sons, the only sons he had, Antiphantes and Tymbraeus. Some accounts say Apollo sent the serpents for an unrelated offense, and it was just timing, that it happened right at the same time as striking the horse. But anyways, Laocoon is an antique marble group now in the Vatican. It represents the Trojan priest Laocoon and his two sons being literally crushed to death by these snakes. I mean, think of the emotion in this sculpture compared to those early images of man, to those early Kouros. Just a huge difference. He's put to death by snakes because it's a penalty for warning the Trojans against the wooden horse of the Greeks. And incidentally, relating by Virgil in the Aeneid, it usually dates to about 2nd or 1st century BC. And it is an original Hellenistic piece. There's also Roman copies that are out there. Braccio was commissioned to make another copy of Laocoon by Pope Leo X. But here, when we think about the way that this is happening, we don't just see Laocoon being killed because of what he did. Now, he's strong, but the serpent is stronger. But it's not just killing him, it's killing his progeny. It's killing his two sons. It's killing all the seed that he has. He will never go on. He will be wiped from the earth. He will be vanquished forever. That is the goal here. So that's the difference between the early Greek art, which is based on ration, reason, strength, and then after Alexander comes through and there's chaos and and we continue to kind of develop these ideas of reason and morality, and we see the sculpture change. This is the Nike of Samothrace. We looked at it just a second ago. This is a much better picture. It is a representation of Nike, the Winged Victory, and it is in the Louvre in Paris. The Winged Victory, considered the finest extent of Hellenistic Greek sculpture, portrays the goddess of victory alighting on top of a ship's bow, with her wings spread and her clinging garments are rippled in the wind. The large 8-foot-high marble sculpture, created by Rhodian sculptor between 220 and 190 BC, was discovered on the Aegean island of Samothrace in 1863 and immediately was sent to the Louvre in Paris, where it is displayed there now on the landing of the Daruk staircase. The statue's head and arms are missing, so we don't really know what they may have looked like. But notice the way that she's portrayed. So this isn't just a very beginning. This is a very long staircase. You go all the way up to the top, and there she is, like just sort of on a piece that looks like the bow of a ship. So in today's modern world, everything is visual. Just think of how much of your day is spent looking at a computer, tablet, television, or phone screen. We are processing images constantly, moving and still, much more than our ancestors who only had images in paint or sculpture or tapestry to look at, to tell their stories. Everyone is shifting from verbal thinking to visual thinking, and understanding art may be one of the best ways to prepare for this and succeed in this new visual world. What are the nuances? What is the story? Why did the sculpture change in a short couple hundred years from one type of sculpture to this other? And become so much more realistic. Something that we basically, to this day, we base what looks good on these very realistic Greek sculptures. We have to say to ourselves, we're all part of the human race. So any piece of art created by humans is technically all of our history. You can view art history as your own by studying more than about the art, but specifically about your culture or your ancestors. You gain a deeper understanding of your past and your present if you can connect to artworks and the people of your past. Studying art helps us to understand ourselves. Art shows us what was important and valuable over time from depictions within the art itself. What we have to do is look at those early cave paintings. Equally important, we learn what aspects of life were significant for certain times and certain cultures. Why study art? Because art tells us a story. Studying art means you get to uncover the story. You'll improve your critical thinking skills and learn so much along the way. So continue to watch the other videos that I have in this section. There's different periods of art. I'm hoping that it helps enlighten you. And till next time.